30th birthdays are among the most reflective celebrations that we have. They serve as an inflection point in the aging process, representing a threshold between the youth that came before and older years that will come after. 30 signals a forthcoming maturity for the years and decades ahead for individuals. The same can be said for major pharmaceutical companies. Born out of one of the largest corporate mergers in history, Novartis was founded in 1996 and celebrated its 30th anniversary this year. As such, the Swiss pharma giant is reflecting on its corporate branding down to the color palette as it eyes a future where its R&D operations lead to new drugs on the market that target a host of disease states and medical conditions. In order to articulate its mission and underscore how it has evolved from a marketing perspective, Novartis is taking a look back before it sets its eyes on the future. As Don Draper said in his iconic Kodak pitch in the season 1 finale of Mad Men, advertising can focus on the new, but should also harness the power of nostalgia. It's delicate, but potent. This week's episode features reporter Bella Jakowski in conversation with Novartis' Chief Corporate Affairs Officer Michelle Weiss. The pair discuss the history of Novartis, how it is recognizing its 30 years in business, and what we can expect from the drug maker as it relates to marketing in the months and years ahead. And for our trend segment, I'm joined by editor-at-large Steve Madden and pharma editor Lesha Bushek to talk about the FDA's proposed de facto pharma ad ban now that the dust has settled, at least a little bit.
All right, we're really excited to welcome Michelle on the podcast today. She's the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer for Novartis, and it's a big year for the company. It's a milestone coming up on its 30th anniversary and celebrating a bit of a brand refresh later this week. It'll be past by the time folks listen to this. First, I want to take an opportunity. Novartis had a big win this year at Cannes. We're now a few weeks post, but Relax Your Tight End. That campaign was very popular, had a lot of great reception throughout the year, aired during the Super Bowl, of course. I had a chance to talk to Delaney Walker about it back a few months ago, who just talked about the positive impact of the humor on a campaign, such a serious topic. So let me ask Michelle, first, congratulations on behalf of, for you and the team. And can you just talk to me a little bit about what it felt like to be recognized in that way?
Yeah, I mean, it was a huge win for the team, and I have to give credit to Gail Horwood, who is our U.S. Chief Marketing Officer. She and her team, Denise on her team and others, really did a great job with the creative. If you think about this year's Super Bowl ad, last year's Super Bowl ad, it really brings who Novartis is to life. Number one, because it brings awareness to these therapy areas, and the fact that people need to get screened early to be able to intercept their health in a positive way is important to spread the word on that one and get more patients treated faster. But what's unique about what the team did was to pull together the really tone and personality of Novartis, which is surprisingly clever. And so you look at this year's ad and it takes a sense of humor to something that is a really serious issue, but it allows people to kind of look at it in a positive way versus a negative way. And it helps prevention, right, with early screening. So we're accomplishing a lot of things, and we're, countering the fear that people have for the testing, because people are reticent because they don't know that it's an easy blood test.
Yeah, and what better vehicle than the Super Bowl to reach men? And, they're obviously, it's a highly stigmatized sort of area. And so it sounds like it really just cut through some of that noise. Michelle, let me ask you then about the rebrand, which I understand is coming on the 30th anniversary. Why is right now the time?
When you take a look at it, I don't know that I would even call it a rebrand. So I know a lot of other companies do a big splash and debut a whole new brand and a whole new look. And for us, it's really not a whole new anything. What we actually did was look back in the history of the company. We looked in our archives. The orange that you see now, which is called Space Orange, is something that is a color that we had historically for decades. So we're not debuting really anything new. What we're doing is leaning into our heritage, leaning into our history. And it all came from a walk through our company archives. We discovered some amazing art that was on old packaging from the 1950s and the 1960s. And we started to take a look at some of the assets that we had over time. And we were like, why didn't we lean into who we are and where we've been and the innovation that we've brought to patients? And so it's really None of it is new. We're just celebrating, and 30th anniversary is just a perfect time to celebrate who we are, where we've been, and where we're going. And so what you see today with the space orange and the black and the white are colors that we've used in the past. And we're just refreshing it to bring it forward. So you'll see us celebrating our accomplishments and what our employees and associates have done, and partners, when you see things like the campus, or the packaging that we've used in the past, or any of the assets or ad campaigns that we've used in the past. It's to bring forward the purpose and remind people that we as a company have accomplished so much together, and we're going to continue to accomplish so much more. So what you're seeing is not anything new. We're just leaning into what's ownably ours that we feel like deserves the celebration and the recognition.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting history that I, reviewed in the content you guys sent over. I'm curious, and you sort of teed this up for me. Obviously, you're a big company, you're a growing company. You recently announced that there's going to be an acquisition for a cancer biotech worth $1.5 billion. Huge. I'm curious how you think about keeping the brand's identity consistent, sort of as the company adds new businesses through acquisitions.
Yeah, I mean, as the common thread, I think, for anything that we do is the way that we serve patients and our dedication to innovation. So anything we add is always focused on the purpose of bringing more hope to more patients and more medicine to patients worldwide. So you'll see that common thread throughout. And I think, working in this industry versus others, we all feel the same way about what we can do to help families, to help individuals feel better, right? So that is a red thread that goes throughout. And for other companies, it's new innovation to help us get more medicines to more people, to encourage more breakthroughs for more patients. So you'll see that anything that we add all still has that common purpose, and it's what ties everything together.
Absolutely. And I understand that there's going to be some editorial and video content premiering with this brand refresh. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know you're probably a little bit restricted, but I'm curious if you can share anything about how it might differ from like a traditional anniversary campaign.
Yeah, I think, it leans into who we are, again, and the celebration of who we are. And so what you're going to see you think about it, you never know. Like if I'm sitting in a town hall internally, you never know what's going on with people that are sitting next to you or behind you. And so what we're doing is really taking a look at everyone being a patient, knowing a patient. Everyone has a loved one or a friend, a family member, or even could be a patient themselves or a caregiver. And it's really taking that thought and ensuring that everyone feels included and a part of helping that group of people out. And so what you'll see is a celebration of the people around us, the people in our communities, the people in our company that really show us what is ownable for us and how we help each other out. And so everything that we're debuting is going to be either our campus, our people, our archives, our photography, our science is our actual science. So what we see in the labs is going to be what we're going to start using. So everything will be uniquely ownable, and they will all have really rich stories behind them.
Yeah, I love that. We spent a lot of time thinking at MM+M about how it would, of course, there's a lot of like legal and regulatory concerns, but like how it behoves pharma brands to get out and do more of that sort of proactive communication about the science that they're doing, the scientists they employ, and the communities that they serve. So I'm excited to see some of that content myself. And I guess I would just ask, maybe as a follow-up to that question, how do you make sure a refresh like this feels substantive and not, purely cosmetic?
I mean, it all goes back to the rich history behind everything that we're using. So, for example, we will go back and we will show video or packaging, and all of that is substantive because it leads to or has been part of a breakthrough or a scientific movement or a medicine. So, it's not just about how it looks, but it's all the stories behind that show the advancements in innovation, science, and for patients.
Absolutely. And, I think I'd be remiss to not ask you a little bit about branding and sort of corporate identity, not just for Novartis, but also like all of the drug makers, both domestically and abroad, how they're sort of dealing with the Trump administration's policies, whether it be most favored nation pricing or, the threat of tariffs, stuff like that. I think we can all be on the same page about wanting treatment to be affordable and accessible to all, but it's really put a spotlight on drug makers and on pharma companies. Do you see sort of like these campaigns and celebrating anniversaries and bringing to the forefront the good work that you all are doing as sort of a strategy in dealing with those sort of political pressures?
I'm not sure that necessarily whether these political pressures would be present or not, how we would be different. Because for us, it is always going to be about the treatments that we can bring patients. It's always going to be about curing diseases and making people feel better. It'll always be about scientific innovation and bringing medicine forward. So regardless of what, any administration and where it stands, that would still be the purpose. It just does happen to be in a complex geopolitical time. But I think no matter what, everyone can agree that patients, they need to get the help they need.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting we covered a campaign by Bio, and I think pharma may have also had some similar sort of work around just promoting the importance of investing in R&D and science, and keeping up these institutions. So it's interesting. I haven't been at MM+M for long, but seeing sort of how those campaigns and building trust or I should say public trust around, not specific brands necessarily doing it, but sort of on behalf of these organizations, these trade organizations, sort of trying to secure the path forward for science. Let me ask you then, and feel free to sort of take this in any direction you want, but like, what will success look like in terms of this brand refresh? What do you hope to see? What are you planning on measuring? So I guess sort of like both objectively and subjectively, what will success look like?
Yeah. As we take a look at it, we have both internal and external measures, right? Internally, we want people to feel proud of where they work, and bringing forward and reminding people the history of what we've done and the future of what's to come and the opportunities that they have to create breakthroughs for patients is an internal measure. So it is that of, pride and the faith that your employee, the people that you work for, are doing the right thing to move humanity forward, right? Externally, what we want to ensure is that people really understand who we are as a brand and how we've moved innovation forward, but also that we are fierce about finding solutions for patients and dedicated to the science and the innovation that helps people thrive. So hopefully that will be what comes across, because like you said earlier, it is not just about what things look like. It's actually the stories behind them and the depth of the meaning of what we've been able to do to transform people's lives and give them more hope for the future.
It was the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer. Was that a new position with the company, or was it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you're the first in the role. Is that right?
This is, the role started when I started. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a big job. I'd love to sort of just ask you as we wrap up here, how you've seen your role within the organization and just having a corporate affairs officer sort of generally, how you've seen things change, how you've seen sort of your role in shaping the organization, public perception of Novartis.
I think it was a really good time to create this position because the integration of, for example, corporate marketing, government and public affairs and communications in the transformational time, because the marketplace is changing so quickly, And agility and flexibility are really important in handling and tackling the issues that we need to handle today, along with the geopolitical complexity. Having it all under one house enables us to move a lot faster. And we're all one team. So we're pretty seamless in how we work. And I've made some changes here, for example, integrating internal and external communications. Everyone on the team now does both. We don't have just one internal team and another. There's no reason to have two different, people at a meeting. And with agility and speed and flexibility being super important, we can pick up any team and move them immediately to be able to respond to anything. And we have all of the competencies under one roof to be able to solve lots of the problems much faster than I think, different functions and different departments would if we weren't all one team.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes total sense. Well, Michelle, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming on the show. And we'll, of course, be looking forward to seeing this refresh and what's to come for Novartis.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So in the latest edition of Trend segment, doubling as Stuart Little, The Sky is Falling, we're going to talk about the FDA's recent proposals for what would, in essence, be a de facto pharma ad ban. Lesha, why don't you kind of lay out the state of affairs as it relates to where it is right now? We're a couple weeks out from the proposal, but what have you gathered from talking to people in the industry about what's at stake here?
Sure. So just like a quick overview of what the proposal is, the FDA kind of quietly included a proposed rule in its 2026 Unified Agenda published earlier in July. And essentially, the rule would want to remove the adequate provision guidance that the industry has relied on since the late 90s. And when I spoke to some people in the industry about this, they called it essentially a de facto ad ban because removing adequate provision would make it pretty much really difficult for drug makers to advertise on broadcast TV or radio in the ways that they traditionally have, because they would have to list the full safety and risk information in the ad, as opposed to just including a major statement and then linking people to another source that lists the full safety and risk information. So that seems kind of scary at first, but I did speak to a couple legal experts as well. And the pathway to actually getting this rule finalized is a pretty long and sort of arduous path for the FDA. Like, they would have to go through a whole 2-year rulemaking process in which they have like 60 to 90 days in which industry and the public can comment on the rule, and they have to take that into account. And then if the rule is finalized, there will likely be a bunch of First Amendment lawsuits launched by the industry, basically to prevent it from going into effect. And historically, we've seen the courts side with industry against the FDA in the past when it comes to pharma drug advertising and First Amendment commercial speech lawsuits. So, even though it's kind of a scary thing for industry to see this as a de facto ad ban, actually having it implemented is another story. And we don't really know if that's going to happen because there are a lot of obstacles in the way. But it is something to keep an eye on. And, a lot of the people that I spoke to in the industry on both the agency side and on the pharma marketing side are already preparing for it just in case. So they're like scenario planning. They're thinking about are there other channels aside from TV and radio that we can invest more money into and invest more of our efforts into? Can we lay a foundation now sort of in preparation for this if it were to happen? And honestly, I would say there is more of a positive sentiment. I was expecting maybe more of a negative sentiment from people in the industry, but mostly they were saying, well, it's kind of already accelerating something that we've already been doing, which is this omni-channel approach, really pouring our efforts into digital stuff, social media, rather than traditional broadcast TV ads anyway. I would say generally there was more of a positive view of it than I expected, but I'm curious to hear both of your thoughts on this.
It definitely. And I, before we get into just more of the side that you're talking about, where it's okay, so if this comes to pass, how do we kind of rework and what best practices can we follow? I just want to rewind a little bit from the Trump administration's perspective, because we had the action last year where it was okay, we're going to do this crackdown. We're going to send out all these warning letters. We're going to make it harder for you to put your ads on TV or social media, wherever we can find them. And it obviously extended into like promotional websites and that sort of stuff. What is the Trump administration's thinking with this, where it's like that we want consumers to be so informed about the products that they're being marketed to? Or like, what's the thinking where it's like, we want you to have to lay out all this sort of stuff other than just making it so difficult to put this stuff on television?
I mean, I think that the current administration, and especially RFK Jr., he has like a very specific view of the pharma industry and pharma ads, and that he believes advertising is misleading to consumers because it's not containing all of the safety and risk information. And like, one can argue whether that's true or not. But his view is essentially that removing adequate provision would, and this is a quote from the FDA that they included in the rule, it would provide consumers with more complete safety information during all advertisements covered by the rule, thus improving consumer understanding when they participate in healthcare decision making. So that's the FDA's argument. Obviously, people in the industry have the opposite argument, and they're saying, actually pharma ads are educational. They provide consumers with more tools and resources to make better decisions for their health. But the FDA is taking the opposite view of that right now, at least under this administration.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things where it's like almost you could see consumers getting bogged down with information overload in terms of like if you had 3 minutes of just straight information being read to them. Matt, I want to bring you into the conversation. What do you make of just the state of play for where things are, and even that argument that the administration is putting forward for like, hey, this is why we want to do that?
Well, I don't necessarily buy the administration's explanation. I think a more informed consumer of anything is a good idea. So if you're going to do it with pharmaceutical products, are you going to do the same thing with, automobile advertising? And I think that's probably one of the approaches that you could take in a possible defense. They often talk about, companies often talk about First Amendment rights, that this is a First Amendment issue. But I think more than that it's, there is a certain amount of fatigue with these ads anyway, right? Because the MLR is so restrictive and fair and balance is so kind of onerous that these ads have a real same, they've become tropes and they're very easy to satirize, as Saturday Night Live has done time and again, to great comic effect, might I add. I think what this does more than anything is open up an opportunity for the industry to stop and say, like, maybe we have relied too much on broadcast ads and other kinds of ads that would require this sort of fair and balanced explanation. Are there other things we can do, right? Can we do more disease awareness states that don't actually make claims, right? It's the claims that you make that drive this. Are there other forms of marketing? We talk a lot about omni-channel marketing. I wrote a couple of weeks ago about phygital marketing, which is sort of like a hybrid of the physical experience and the digital experience, because everything needs to have a digital component to it, right? But if you've ever gone to like a medical conference or a trade show, you know that the industry is extremely skilled in creating experiential marketing platforms where you go into a pavilion and you walk through, and these things win awards all the time. In researching the phygital piece, I talked with a guy named Perry DiGregorio who runs Alaqua Marketing, and he creates very impressive phygital or experiential, I would probably say more experiential pavilions that, yes, something that you need to walk through, that a consumer needs to walk through it's not going to reach nearly as many people as a broadcast ad, for example. But I think that the effect, the uptake, the lingering effect, and certainly the mind share that you get from an experience like that is greater than an ad that's so easy to parody that you just tune it out when it comes on.
No, I think your point's well taken there. And it brings to mind when we were doing our Agency 100 interviews, I spoke with the folks at Saatchi & Saatchi Health, and they had specifically brought up that when the crackdown began last September, and we talked about it on the podcast at length, everyone thought the world was falling. Everybody thought that everything was going to change forever and we weren't going to be able to have ads on TV. We still have ads on TV. We still get pitched them. It's still a big part of our coverage area. But they talked about that, hey, they got a lot more clever and innovative in terms of how they approach their marketing with their clients, where it's like, to your point, maybe this is a disease awareness play that we're going to do. Maybe this, and just being able to do stuff in non-traditional ways on non-traditional channels to kind of back end this. And that's where I want to bring you in, Lesha, is like, what have you heard from folks in terms of like, hey, that's the approach that we could take if this happens, 7 or 8 steps down the line, if it ever came to be. But like, obviously they're starting to plan for it because they've had, at this point, almost 10 months of practice with the crackdown that we had.
Yeah, I mean, some of the obvious ways is, obviously they might look into investing more in HCP focused engagements and ads, leaning more into patient advocacy and education. So partnering with patient advocacy groups to co-create content is another option. And then, some of these like larger unbranded campaigns and disease state awareness campaigns, there are ways for consumers to get to the brand from those campaigns, even if it's more of an indirect way, and really kind of pour more into those like general education campaigns. So those are some of the kind of obvious things that people are already doing, but they may be spending a little more time doing if this were to happen. And right now, as the proposed rule stands, like it doesn't necessarily include social media stuff. So there might be an increase in like influencer partnerships, more social media stuff. It really would be limited, as we understand right now, to TV and radio broadcast ads. So there's like a lot of different things that marketers can do if this were to pass. But again, from the legal side of things, I'm not even sure if it will be finalized. And if it is finalized, like legally, there could be a lot of lawsuits and challenges to it. So it might not even be implemented. So I do want to throw that out there too, because I think that's also a real possibility.
And it's interesting you bring that up too, because like I remember when they announced the pharma ad crackdown last year and everyone was like, oh, it's going to be coming for TV. And it's like, but they made a specific reference like, and we reserve the right for social media. And obviously we've seen so many of them that got flagged and have either been taken down or scrutinized and stuff. And those have been on social platforms as well. Matt, I'm curious what you make of that in terms of like, again, this it's not come to pass, but it's something you got to have on your radar. And obviously some folks, whether they're on the agency side or brand side, are already starting to put those wheels in motion.
Yeah, I mean, it's look, these are smart, endlessly inventive people, right? And they'll be able to figure out ways to market products. It's just a question of reach, really. Slapping an ad for a therapy or a drug on 60 Minutes or on a football game, a big football game. You reach a really big market, right? But that's a little bit of a shotgun approach. If, as Lesha said, if you do partnerships with advocacy groups, I'm thinking particularly in the rare disease space or rare cancer space, you can use a rifle shot there, and it's not as scattered an approach. You might actually see a higher ROI. So there are a lot of different ways to go about this, and again, not to be Chicken Little, not to say the sky is falling, but it's always good to have a plan B. And in this case, you might want to have a plan C and D as well.
And Lesha, just kind of walk us through what the go forward looks like too. I know that you talk with our friend Jim Potter over at the 4A's Health, and you've talked with a number of people in the industry. So like this is put out there, the administration has kind of made its line in the sand. Where does it progress in terms of like an actual timeline? Like they have to finalize the rule, right? And then it goes from there?
Yeah. So, I mean, even before they finalize it, I think they have to still open up a public comment period that would be about 60 to 90 days. And we're not even at that point yet. I think like once like, I don't know exactly the step between the unified agenda posting and then the 60 to 90 day comment period, but there are a few steps in between that and the comment period. And then once the comment period is open, industry, companies, the public can comment on the rule and what they want to see happen with it. And the FDA has to take that into account. And then it's about a 2-year process before we would see a potential finalized rule. So there's time for companies to prepare is essentially what, Jim Potter and a couple other people I spoke to have said. So it's not something that people should be panicking over necessarily, but, they should spend the next year or two really putting some money aside potentially for some legal challenges, but also, as we've talked about, laying the foundation for a plan B, C, or D.
I'm of two minds on that. One, I'll be extremely curious if we see any top 20 pharma or any notable drug makers weigh in on that. I think they're trying to toe a line where they're not trying to poke the bear of the administration, but like they obviously don't want to. Yeah. They don't want to be muzzled in that way. And two, the idea that this could land in the middle of the summer of a hotly contested presidential election with who knows what the political landscape looks like at that point could be
might change completely. We don't know. That's the other thing we were saying. It's like it's an administration that has flip-flopped in the past. So it's almost like it is a little unpredictable. And we might have a change in administration before something like this is even finalized. So there's a lot of unknowns.
An administration that's flip-flopped in the past is probably the biggest understatement of anyone's approach to the Trump healthcare policy. But I think we can leave it at that in terms of this discussion. Madden and Lesha, appreciate you both. Lesha, certainly for all the reporting that you've done on this. Looking forward to seeing how this all plays out in the weeks and months and from your vantage point, years to come. So it'll be interesting to follow. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in for this week's episode. We have a great guest next week. We have Allison CEO Wendy Lund. She joined us in studio for an interview with Bella. She is a Pinnacle honoree. She's a Woman of Distinction honoree. And I'm sure there's something else that I'm missing here, but she's a worthwhile interview. She's got great takes on the GLP-1 landscape and everything. So you want to tune in to next week's episode. We will see you then. Take care in the meantime.